It was supposed to be just another Saturday in Pittsburgh, a day like any other. But on October 15th, 2022, 3 people would end up dead, 2 of them innocent bystanders, and one young man's story would come to a violent and heartbreaking end. Welcome back to True Crime Archives channel, where the shadows hold secrets and the truth hides between headlines. Today's story is more than a fatal shooting. It's a series of events so tragic, so senseless, that it left an entire community in shock. This is the real-life tale of John James Horns Jr., a promising young man whose journey ended far too soon, and the funeral massacre that no one saw coming. If you're drawn to unsolved crimes, criminal psychology, mysterious homicides, and horror-infused reality, this is the case you won't forget. Subscribe now and join our global community of truth seekers. John James Horns Jr. was born in 2002 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a city known as much for its steel as for its struggle. From an early age, John found solace in one thing: basketball. It was more than just a sport. For John, it was therapy, discipline, and his escape from the daily pressures of life. His love for the game was nurtured through local programs like the Pittsburgh Project and Urban Impact. From Allegheny Elementary to Alderice High School, he played with heart. Those who knew him described a generous soul, someone who'd give his last dollar or defend a friend in danger. His smile could disarm the worst moment. His laughter lingered like sunlight after a storm. John wasn't perfect, but he was human, ambitious, emotional, resilient. He wasn't chasing fame or fortune, just peace for himself, his friends, and his family. But peace is a rare currency in certain corners of Pittsburgh, where gunfire is as frequent as hope is fleeting.
Saturday, October 15th, 2022. Around 3 p.m., a trio of friends stood outside the Sunoco gas station on Cedar Avenue. They weren't causing trouble, just talking, maybe planning their next move, waiting for a bus. Then it happened. An SUV crept down the street, slow, quiet, unassuming. But seconds later, a burst of gunfire tore through the silence. Surveillance footage showed something deeply disturbing. John and his 2 friends didn't run. They drew weapons, opening fire on the SUV. Chaos erupted. Bullets sliced through the air. The vehicle was riddled with gunfire. But this wasn't a one-sided ambush. The SUV's occupants were also armed. They fired back, unleashing a torrent of bullets that turned the sidewalk into a war zone. Gas pumps became cover. Screams echoed as civilians dove behind vehicles. What began as a drive-by escalated into a full-blown urban shootout. In the midst of the crossfire, 2 lives were stolen. Betty Jean Ate and Jacqueline Mahalik, 2 women just waiting for a bus, unarmed, uninvolved, unaware. Their bodies hit the pavement within seconds, bullets tearing through the peace they never threatened. John was struck too. A return bullet from the SUV found its mark. He fell near a playground, his handgun by his side. One of his friends was hit in the leg, but survived. 911 calls flooded dispatch. The scene that greeted first responders was carnage. CPR was performed on the spot. Victims were rushed to hospitals. But it was too late. All 3, Betty, Jacqueline, and John, were pronounced dead within the hour. Investigators worked fast. The evidence pointed to a dispute turned deadly. A conflict, its roots unknown, had escalated into lethal violence between John's group and the SUV's occupants. Within days, arrests followed. Charn Troutman, 19, believed to be in the SUV, was charged with homicide in John's death. Charles Hines, 21, who stood beside John and allegedly fired his weapon, was charged with double homicide for the deaths of the 2 bystanders. Police confirmed that all 3, Troutman, Hines, and John, were involved in the shootout. John's body was found near a playground, his weapon recovered. The women, completely uninvolved, victims of a bullet's blind trajectory. One bystander, the daughter of victim Betty Everett, expressed the heartbreak best. "My mother lived here. That wasn't just a bus stop. It was her home for 5 years. She wasn't just caught in the wrong place. The place was wronged."
October 28, 2022. 13 days after the shooting, friends and family gathered at Destiny of Faith Church to say goodbye to John James Horns Jr. Over 100 mourners filled the sanctuary. There were prayers, tears, stories shared in hushed tones. The room was heavy with sorrow and something else, fear, a whisper among mourners. What if they come? At 11:03 a.m., that fear became reality. Surveillance footage would later confirm the unimaginable. As the service progressed, two masked gunmen approached the church. Within seconds, bullets shattered the solemn silence. Screams filled the air. Chaos, blood, people diving behind cars. One woman, hit, tried to crawl back to safety. This wasn't a random act. This was an ambush at a funeral. Inside the church, panic surged like a tidal wave. The mourners, many already reeling from grief, were now scrambling for their lives. Some dove behind pews, others huddled on the floor. A few made it to the exits, most didn't. Surveillance footage from outside Destiny of Faith Church later showed the masked attacker firing directly into the fleeing crowd. No hesitation, no mercy. Random targets, intent to kill. It was a house of mourning turned battlefield. What was meant to be a sacred goodbye became a second crime scene. Inside the walls of Destiny of Faith Church, mourners were already drowning in grief. Many were still wiping away tears from the service that had honored the life and untimely death of 20-year-old John James Horns Jr. But grief would soon become terror. Gunfire erupted outside. Panic swept through the sanctuary like a plague. Some threw themselves under pews. Others ducked behind communion tables, clutching children and loved ones, praying for it all to end. The screams, the chaos, the blood, it turned a sacred space into a battlefield. Witnesses later testified they heard over a dozen gunshots, a rapid burst of violence that shattered any illusion of safety. Mothers held their babies close, elders whispered prayers through trembling lips, and still, the bullets came. This was not just another shooting. This was a true crime horror, a deliberate, cruel ambush on a place meant for peace. And a community that had gathered to mourn now had to fight for survival. In the aftermath, detectives combed through surveillance footage, searching for answers. What they found chilled even the most seasoned investigators. Outside the church, two masked individuals were seen approaching. Both wore black. Their faces were concealed by balaclavas. Their posture, calm, deliberate. For 20 to 30 minutes, they lingered outside a restaurant across the street, studying the area, waiting, calculating. The footage shows one of them brandishing a handgun in plain sight, while the other concealed something beneath his jacket, likely another firearm. Then, without hesitation, they crossed the street and opened fire on the mourners gathered outside. This was not spontaneous. It was premeditated. A calculated strike designed to maximize fear, suffering, and chaos. The 911 lines were flooded in seconds. Active shooter at a funeral, callers screamed. Pittsburgh police raced to the scene, but the trauma had already taken root. 5 people had been hit by the hail of bullets. Some lay bleeding on the church's front steps. Others had collapsed in the parking lot. EMTs worked fast, triaging on site, bandaging wounds, and stabilizing victims under fire. Miraculously, all 5 would survive. But the emotional and psychological damage? That would be harder to mend. As investigators canvassed the scene, the pattern became clear. The shooters had targeted a funeral with intent, not just to harm, but to send a message. More surveillance footage emerged. A black car seen pulling up before the gunman approached. Same car spotted moments after the ambush, speeding away from Brighton Road. This was the getaway vehicle. Detectives got to work. They used traffic cams and business surveillance systems to trace the car. Block by block, across Pittsburgh, the trail led them to a quiet residential area in McKees Rocks, a town that never expected to become a manhunt backdrop. There, officers spotted the vehicle, stuck in traffic on McKees Rocks Bridge. 2 individuals sat inside, tense, nervous. As law enforcement surrounded the black car, the suspects panicked. One man jumped out, tossing a handgun onto the pavement.
The other fled in the opposite direction, then made a last, desperate move. He threw his firearm into the river, hoping to erase the evidence. It didn't work. Sean Davis, 19, and Hezekiah Nixon, just 16 years old, were taken into custody on the spot. They were charged with a litany of serious offenses: attempted homicide, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, firearms violations. The shooting at John Horns Jr.'s funeral wasn't just a tragedy. It was a planned attack, an act of violent retaliation, or something darker. As detectives dug deeper, another disturbing detail came to light. John's family saw it coming. In the days leading up to the service, they voiced concern. Whispers circulated about tensions. Fears rose that the violence wasn't over. His family formally requested a police presence at the church, hoping the uniformed presence would deter any escalation. According to official records, the request was acknowledged. 2 officers were assigned to cover the funeral, but when the time came, they weren't there. It was later revealed that the 2 assigned officers went to the wrong location, a nearby funeral home, not Destiny of Faith Church. Finding nothing there, they left. No one followed up. No one corrected the mistake. When the gunman opened fire at 11:03 a.m., there were 0 police officers present. Pittsburgh Police Major Crimes Commander Richard Ford later admitted to CBS News, "If there's a request and it falls through the cracks, that's something we need to immediately look at." To the grieving families, it was more than a crack. It was a catastrophic failure. Community leaders, activists, and citizens all asked the same question: how could this happen? Beth Pittinger, director of the Citizen Police Review Board, spoke on behalf of the enraged public. Given the circumstances of John's death, a public shootout involving multiple armed suspects, and the murder of innocent bystanders, police should have been there, request or not. The 2 officers assigned that day were allegedly suspended. But no public statement confirmed disciplinary action. No supervisors were held publicly accountable. No systemic changes were immediately announced. For many, that wasn't enough. Not for the families, not for the victims, not for justice. In the media, John James Horns Jr. became another statistic, another young man gunned down in gang-linked violence. But to those who truly knew him, that narrative was incomplete and unfair. He was a young man who loved basketball, who smiled wide and gave freely, who fought to protect his friends, who dreamed of stability, who was trying to stay afloat in a world that offered no life jackets. His loved ones vehemently deny any allegations that John was part of a violent lifestyle. To them, he was a victim of circumstance, a soul caught in the current of something far larger than himself. This was never just one crime. It was 2. A shooting, and then a second, more sinister act of vengeance. One life lost turned into 2 crime scenes. A funeral turned into a firefight. And a grieving community was left with more questions than answers. How many more families have to bury their children beneath the weight of bullets and bureaucracy? What do you think? Was this tragedy avoidable? Did law enforcement fail the community when it was needed most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this case as disturbing and compelling as we did, please consider subscribing to True Crime Archives channel. We uncover the dark, the hidden, and the unresolved, one story at a time.